Well, hello again everyone. I'm debating whether or not I make this one continuous video or if I break it up into several short videos, as I do not have a lot of knowledge on the aircraft in this other hangar we have here at the New Zealand Warbirds Association. So as you can see, we've stepped even further back in time. But I'd first like to talk about the least aircraft looking of all our aircraft. This is actually a Ford Model T ambulance. The chassis is original. I can't tell you exactly when it came from, but I do know that for a fact that the chassis and engine are original, but the body is a replica. This vehicle does run, it does drive. If you come to our open days, you will see it going around, most likely. If I do make this one continuous video, or if I do decide actually rather to split this up, actually yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll make this one continuous video, but if I decide to split it up, I will do so and I'll just title every video with what I'll be looking at. Apologies for that, everyone. So this is one of our two current, okay, there we go, there's both of them. There's two of our Tiger Moths currently displayed here in our World War I and Interwar period hangar. That one there in the foreground, no, the background, the furthest away, is one of the latest builds here at the New Zealand Warbirds Association. If I have to get this correct now, I believe it is one of, if not the first Tiger Moth built here in New Zealand when it was originally built. When that was, I can't tell you exactly, but it was recently refurbished. The Tiger Moth aircraft were built by the de Havilland Company in the 1930s and operated by many of the Allied and Commonwealth nations during the Second World War. It was used as an initial trainer before the trainees moved on to the T6 Texans, or the Harvards as I've been calling them. And much like the Harvards were, these were your early pilot makers. You want you to finish your ground school, you'd come up in one of these with a trainer. And like many aircraft at the time, it's got a fabric-coated fuselage and wings. I don't know how well if you can hear this. I don't know if that came through or not, but that just gives you an idea of how effectively fragile these aircraft actually are. This is powered by another one of those inverted four-cylinder engines. Again, not the fastest of aircraft, but it could do its job very well. Outside of being trained aircraft, some people do use it as a recreational aircraft. Aerobatics-wise, again, like a lot of the early training aircraft, you can't really do much in terms of aerobatics, though you can try your best. The next aircraft I'm here to look at is the Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2. This was a British-built light fighter and bomber aircraft for World War II, in the later stages of World War II. However, like majority, if not all of our World War I aircraft, did I say World War II? If I did, my apologies, I meant to say World War I. I've been so busy talking about World War II aircraft, I'm now here talking about World War I aircraft. World War I, late stages of World War I, this aircraft was originally built. This is, as I said, like many of the other World War I aircraft here, is a replica. This particular BE-2 was flown by, let me repaint that. This particular BE-2 is painted in the schemes of a BE-2 pilot known as William Rhodes Moorhouse, who was a New Zealander. And it's interesting to think it also used as a anti-submarine and coastal patrol aircraft, as well as even a night fighter. But also reconnaissance and light bombing. All that stuff I can understand, but light bombing to me, it's, especially from World War I, it sounds, it's peculiar to think about it. You'd have the pilot most likely sitting in the front seat and the bombardier, if you could call him that, sitting in the back seat. And he'd have a rack of bombs on either side of the aircraft there, and he would grab the bombs by hand and toss them, over the side of the aircraft. Not the most accurate, but hey, for the time it worked. Now this aircraft is powered by it's a 90 horsepower V8 engine. That's what I've been told, what I've read. And as you see, it's got rather large exhaust stacks. Interesting to note, every aircraft you see here, let me rephrase it, a majority of the aircraft you see here do fly, and if you come to our open days, you will see them flying. We do have a big thing for them to fly. And as I said earlier, majority of the aircraft are replicas. But yeah, I'll be honest with you, this one is made, it's a linen type to it. I want to say it could be Irish linen, but I could be wrong. That's all, primarily for weight. Oh, excuse me. It's primarily for weight. The lighter the aircraft is, the easier it is to fly, and effectively the faster it is. But you'll also note there's nothing in the line of suspension or brakes on any of these World War I era aircraft. So, and they used grass strips, as runways. And those are bumpy. Excuse me. And taking off and landing, as you are at speed, the pilot had at best a wicker, basket seat. They would have felt every single one of those bumps throughout their body. And no brakes. I mean, they didn't really need brakes because they were flying, slow enough, and the grass runway strips provided enough friction to slow them down. So, any excuse to lose weight. Now, the next aircraft I'm looking at here is a Bristol Scout D, another British fighter from World War I. It actually was originally designed as a racing aircraft just before the war broke out. It had no idea in mind for hostilities. No weaponry was added. I apologize if you can hear rain because it's not a nice day outside. And it's also very humid. So if you hear me out of breath, it's just because it's very warm and stuffy in these hangars. So, as I mentioned, the Bristol Scout actually flew around five months before the outbreak of World War I. Eventually, the Bristol Scout was developed into a fighter variant, and it had service rifles mounted to the nose above the engine there. Now that, of course, provided a problem because if you didn't time it properly, you would shoot through your propeller, which in time would cause excessive damage and probably even eventually rip the propeller off. Eventually, some point during the war, I don't know exactly who it was, but a synchronization gear was invented and implemented onto the engines to stop the guns firing in the arc of the propeller. That being, as the propeller passes through in front of the gun would stop firing until the propeller had passed. The propeller arc had passed away from the guns, and the guns would continue firing. Now, I say all these aircraft are replicas. This one is no exception. However, its engine is original. If I remember correctly, it's from 1919. Yes, that does sound. It's from 1919, if I remember correctly. This is a Leron engine, producing about 80 horsepower, and this is what's actually called a rotary engine. For those of you who know your cars, it's nothing like a car rotary engine. Everything you see in there spins. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate that because that's rather dangerous and a health and safety hazard, because if there's such thing as a hot magneto, and any of the pistons were on a compression stroke, and if I were to turn the engine and it starts, I would be in a load of trouble. So you will see here in the engine, it's only got one valve, and that's actually the exhaust valve. Now, if I remember correctly, that large pipe you see there is, I might get this wrong now. It could be the intake, unless the intake is at the bottom of the engine, and I could be mistaking that for the other rotary engine we have here, the Gnome, which I think, yes, it is here. So yeah, so that's only got the exhaust valve. The intake was, it all happened within the mechanism here in what's effectively the crank housing. And as it all spins, it uses the centrifugal forces to draw the fuel and oil from the bottom to within the piston so it can be ignited. And that would be, I have asked this before, and I want to say it's sort of within this motion on this side of the engine's rotation. The ignition happens around here-ish. Again, if anyone else knows different, please do let me know. Now, the problem with these rotary engines is, yes, they burnt fuel and oil at the same time, and that was all, anything unburnt was butted out of the engine into the pilot's face, is they had a lot of torque about them, and that's the twisting force. So as the aircraft ran, the engine ran, everything would twist. So if you weren't careful, you could twist yourself into the ground. Another fun fact with these engines is they had no throttle system, purely for lightweightness. They have what's called a blip switch, a little button or switch in the cockpit the pilot can blip, can push, and it momentarily turns off the ignition, and it effectively sounds like the pilot's blipping the engine. You know, when you hear what he's firing, it sounds kind of funny. That, or some, I would assume later on in the war, some companies developed a system where they can, the pilot can select the number of cylinders they want to fire, you know, either increasing or decreasing the amount of thrust being produced. Here's your fun fact for the day. The next aircraft we're looking at here is the Bristol fighter. Again, replica, but used in the later stages of World War I. Designed as a two-seater biplane, as you can see. It could be used as a fighter, a light bomber, and a reconnaissance aircraft. And now you will notice there is no gun at the front, but there is one at the back. There would have been a gun in the front originally, as well as the one at the back. So you can see, you know, the defense had sort of improved somewhat, but when compared to the World War II aircraft, it ain't much. So, despite earlier setbacks operationally, the improved tactics used by the pilots saw the Bristol fighters become one of the most successful British aircraft of World War I and at the time itself. This particular aircraft is one of 6 replicas constructed for the 1980s movie High Road to China. However, the movie was cancelled but made later with different aircraft in use. And the Bristol fighters used for the movie were then placed into storage and effectively forgotten. They were eventually discovered many years back. And this one was then restored to airworthiness and painted in the livery of one of the aircraft flown by New Zealand World War I, and actually I think also World War II. I don't know if he was a fighter pilot or exactly what he did, but Sir Keith Park. So if you want to do some research on Sir Keith Park, feel free to do so. So the next aircraft we're looking at here is an Albatros D5A. This is a German aircraft built in the later stages of World War I. I'll come around a little bit so you can see it. Excuse me, maybe a little bit better. It was one of the most important aircraft that the German Empire built during World War I. It was designed to replace the aging fighters of the time, and it entered frontline service in late 1916. I apologize for the various aircraft noises. This is an active airport after all. It was designed using a streamlined semi-monocoque wooden fuselage as opposed to the fabric fuselages used by a lot of the other aircraft at the same time. So this aircraft on display here is, again, much like with the others, is a replica of the Albatros D5A used by Ferdinand Saint-André of Quebec, Canada. This particular aircraft took about 5,000 hours to build over a 10-year period and has been faithfully constructed to the original plans obtained through the Smithsonian Institute. I again apologize for the loud noise. I might just pause here quickly whilst they pass. This particular Albatros is painted in one of the aircraft, in the colors of one of the aircraft flown by Lieutenant Hunt's, my pronunciation is not going to be the best, I do apologize, Lieutenant Hunt's burning of the German Empire's Air Force during World War I. As you can see, it does have 2 machine guns mounted on top, and most likely would have had an interrupter gear to stop the bullets damaging the propeller. I don't know exactly who it was that invented the interrupter gear, but it was a a very important invention in terms of aerial combat, because if it wasn't for the interrupter gear, pilots would have shot off their propellers and ultimately crashed, which, if I'm honest with you, isn't very ideal. Now onto probably one of, if not the most famous World War I fighter aircraft, the Fokker DR1, also known as the triplane. So it was developed in response to the British Sopwith triplane, which was found to be far superior to the Albatross fighter that the German Empire was using in the middle-late stages of World War I. The Fokker DR1 was introduced as a frontline scout fighter in October of 1917, and pilots were very quick to regard it for its climbing ability and light controls when compared to other German fighters of the time. However, it was quickly outclassed by a new generation of scout aircraft, as well as suffering from numerous structural wing failures. Because of these problems, only around 320 of the DR1s were only built, with the last being in May 1918. This aircraft is painted in the livery of a German pilot, or I'm assuming he's a pilot, of Joseph Jacobs or Josef Jacobs. I don't know. Pardon my pronunciation. He was an ace from World War I, with having 48 victories, the fourth highest number of victories in the German service, and the highest scoring ace in the Fokker DR1. No wonder he's not nowhere near as famous as the Red Baron, that being Manfred von Richthofen. He flew the same aircraft, although his was red. However, he died before the end of World War I whilst flying his DR1. I don't remember if he was shot down or if he crashed, but ultimately he did crash into the ground and was killed. And so, much like many of the fighters from World War I, it had machine guns mounted on top of it. Oh, there they are there. And the problem with having three wings is you had a lot more drag than, say, your biplane counterparts. Although, yes, you did have a reduced wingspan allowing you to roll a lot quicker, you did have problems with drag. And if I remember correctly, the Fokker DR1 was one of the first aircraft to have an aerofoil shaped wing more pronounced than aircraft of a similar era. Here is the fuselage section of a, we'll have this right now, I believe it's a Vickers Wildebeest. I'm not sure what it was used for. I'm not sure why or rather should I say how we got a hold of it. British, I would assume, judging by the looks of it, I'd say it's World War II era aircraft. I would assume it was reconnaissance or transport, the lighter work of aircraft during the war. We used to have it on its wheels. I'm not sure why we took its wheels off. It used to stand much higher and it was quite something to see. It does have a targeting reticle, so I assume it could also have had machine guns on it, probably mounted there on the side there. So it might have done some light fighter work as well. Again, I'm not sure. I've unfortunately not done a lot of research on it, so if anyone knows anything about the Vickers Wildebeest, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I would greatly appreciate it. This here is a Boeing. That's right, a Boeing. This is the Boeing Stearman, an American-built aircraft, I believe in the 1930s, as both a training aircraft for the Air Force and a recreational aircraft for civilian use. Very wonderful aircraft to fly. I've had the opportunity to be a passenger on board the Stearman. It was a wonderful experience. What's interesting to note with the Stearman is, yeah, it's a decently large aircraft made, mostly of, with a fabric skin, but if you look, there's a handlebar on the lower wing. There's one on the other side as well. This is the only aircraft I've seen at the New Zealand Warbirds Association that has these handles here. You grab that handle and you can move the aircraft by hand, albeit with somebody else on the other side. And surprisingly for its size, it's actually relatively easy and light to move. If I come around a bit closer here, you look at the upper wing, you see there's two handles up there as well, and that's for the the person in the front seat to grab a hold of when getting into and out of. the mirror so they can see behind you, and that protruding from the upper wing is the fuel gauge. And what's interesting to note is in recreational use, the Stearmans were among one of the many aircraft for the time used for wing walking. So the wing walker would sit in the front of the aircraft for takeoff and landing. When the time came, they'd grab a hold of those handlebars, climb out onto the top wing, and perform. Another interesting to note is the many engine options that were available for the Stearmans. I don't know exactly which one ours is, but the options range from Pratt & Whitney engine to a Continental to a Lycoming. I believe ours is a Lycoming engine. I could be wrong. It would most likely be on the New Zealand Warbirds website, all the information there. And what's interesting to note is this here is the external starting mechanism. I think if there's someone in the cockpit, they can start it there electronically, but here, so this here is the primer. So you unlock it, you pump fuel into the engine to help it start. This here is you plug in a handle and you wind it up, and that's to wind up the inertial starter. And then this here is you disengage you take out the handle, and then you take out the handle, and then you pull this here. That's to engage the starter to the engine, and you make sure you're standing out the way because you are in fact right there by the engine. So, excuse me. So it's quite something, and the exhaust thankfully is on the other side. So when you're starting up, you don't get covered in hot oil and all that stuff. But if it's been sitting for a while, the oil will, not even if it's been sitting for a while, the oil will come out of nooks and crannies and splatter all over the aircraft and the wings. I remember when I went for my flight in it, I was sitting in the front seat, and the windscreen you see there got not really coated in oil, that's not quite the right word, but I suppose as the only way I could think of it, there was oil all over the windscreen. It was just like light drops that had been sputtered from the engine. But I remember once we'd finished, we got out the aircraft, and the wing, the entire other side wing was just, the leading edge was just coated in oil. And that sounds like a bad thing, but it's not. That's what these old radial engines do. If there's no oil, coming out of the engine, and if it's in a manageable amount, within reasonable tolerance, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, no, this is a wonderful example of an aircraft. Now, the next aircraft I'll show you is another American aircraft. Don't know which one it is exactly, and I don't know a lot about it, but there's a Ryan is the company who built it. It's the PT-22, if I remember correctly. Again, as a early training aircraft for the US Air Force, as well as a recreational aircraft. A little slower and smaller than the Stearman. I'm afraid I don't know a lot about it. If you have any information on it in the comments, please feel free to let me know. Again, much like all the other aircraft you see in this hangar that do fly, you will most likely see it at our open days and air shows. As I said, my apologies, I don't know a lot about it, but please do feel free to let me know if you have any other form of information of it in the comments below. Now, the next aircraft, or rather, remnants of the aircraft, is an aircraft that's actually been in maintenance for the last couple of years because it's had engine issues. I don't know its full name, but I do know the company is Siemens Schuckert. It's another German World War I fighter aircraft that came in the later stages of the war. Again, I'm afraid I don't know much about it. However, it would have had guns mounted to the top of it, single seat for the pilot. It would actually be a biplane. There's the mounts for the upper wing. But this aircraft is the other of the aircraft at Warbirds that has an original engine from, I think, also 1919. But this is the Gnome Monosoupape engine. I don't think it was the engine that was originally used on the aircraft, but it is an engine, albeit French, from World War I and a little bit after World War I. Again, it's another rotary engine where everything turns, and the French monosoupape means one valve, single valve. That being again the exhaust valve. You can see the rocker, the push rod of it there, on a few of the pistons and cylinders. Now this one if I remember correctly, the centrifugal forces of everything spinning sends the fuel and oil mixture from the housing there in the middle into the cylinder through the bottom, and then it gets ignited by the spark plugs and then gets puffed out the side of by the exhaust. Again, much like many of the other rotary engines of the time, a lot of torque gets produced by having everything in the engine spin, even though it's very good for cooling the engine. And with that lot of torque, it'll twist the entire aircraft, and if the pilot wasn't careful, they could twist themselves into the ground, and if they were even less careful, they'd probably even kill themselves. And, having the engine spin, the exhaust, I'm not sure where the exhaust part is in the engine's, if I want to be able to put it, cycle, but, the pilots ran the risk of being coated in hot oil and all that stuff coming out of the engine, so it was all part of the risk, but hey, just to get the job done, right? And again, not much in the line of suspension, or the pilot would have felt and the pilot probably still even does, when this aircraft does fly, feel every bump, as they go along the grass runway strip. As I said, this aircraft actually has been in maintenance for the last, I'm not actually 100% sure, but it's about 2 years. If I remember correctly, the main problem was the engine. If I remember correctly, they found a crack, a rather large crack within the engine mechanism somewhere, and they've just spent this entire time refurbishing it and making sure it's effectively perfect. Yeah, at Warbirds, we maintain our aircraft to such a high standard that even cracks. That's the entire aviation industry. Cracks are effectively a no-go. And so, you have to maintain it in the perfect running orders, and to be able to restore something historical like that and show it off to the public, it's what we're here for at the New Zealand Warbirds. Anyway, back to this aircraft. As I said, it was used throughout World War I. Not throughout World War. It was used most likely in the latter stages of World War I as a fighter aircraft. The guns would have been mounted, as I said earlier, on the top of the aircraft by the nose, like many of the others. I'm not sure if this one had an interrupter gear. I'm not sure if it was out when it came out exactly, be it both the aircraft and the interrupter gear, but it would have done its job. It would have been a fighter aircraft, would have shot at its enemies. And it's also, I looked at things, but also got a wooden monocoque-esque fuselage, but it was also got the fabric wings. I'm not sure if it's made of metal or wood. I can't tell you from here. I unfortunately can't go any closer to the aircraft than I currently am, as it is currently under maintenance. Wow, that rain is coming down quite heavily. I've got no idea if you can hear that. I'm glad I'm inside currently. But yeah, no. That's, I'm afraid, all I have for the knowledge on this aircraft. If you do have any knowledge on the aircraft, please feel free to let me know in the comments, or feel free to go to the New Zealand Warbirds Association website, go find the Ardmore collection, and feel free to have a read of the aircraft there. I'm surprised I haven't done that myself. Oh well, so be it. Leave that up to you guys. But anyways, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you'd want. Other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.